I pity the man who marries her, the Duke said. He was that man by Friday. There is a particular cruelty in being spoken of as though you are not in the room, and there is a particular grace in a woman who hears it, lifts her chin, and continues about her work as though the opinion of small people is simply weather, unpleasant, temporary, and not worth catching cold over. This is the story of Miss Clara Ashworth, a woman the whole of London dismissed before breakfast, and a duke who could not stop thinking about her before supper. The remark was made on a Tuesday. It was the sort of gray London Tuesday that smells of coal smoke and impending rain, the kind of morning that makes even the grandest drawing rooms feel smaller and the people in them feel larger than they have any right to. Lady Mabel Forsyth's morning salon was already crowded when Clara arrived, a little breathless, her worn gray pelisse damp at the shoulders, her gloves, white once, now the color of old cream, buttoned to the wrist, with the careful precision of a woman who has learned that neatness is the only luxury she can afford. She was the poor relation. That was the phrase they used, always with a small, almost unconscious pause before relation, as though the word itself required steadying. Clara Ashworth, daughter of the late Reverend Ashworth of Derbyshire, niece of Lady Mabel Forsyth, née Ashworth, now resident in Lady Mabel's Grosvenor Street townhouse in the capacity of, well, the capacity had never been properly named. She was not a servant. She was not a guest. She occupied a category that polite society preferred to leave undefined, because naming it would require someone to feel guilty about it, and guilt sat poorly at morning salons. Clara's role, in practice, was to arrange flowers, post letters, read aloud when Lady Mabel's eyes tired, accompany the young Forsyth daughters to their lessons, and be present, quietly, usefully present, whenever Lady Mabel required the appearance of a woman of genteel birth at her side, without the inconvenience of an equal. She was very good at her role. She had been doing it for 3 years. She had slipped into the room, intending only to set down the fresh arrangement of hothouse lilies she'd been sent to fetch, place Lady Mabel's forgotten correspondence on the escritoire, and retreat. She was nearly to the escritoire when she heard the voice, deep, precise, carrying the unhurried authority of a man who has never once had to raise it to be heard. Miss Ashworth, the gray creature hovering near the door? Clara stilled. She did not turn. She set the correspondence down with the same measured care she gave to everything, and she kept her face composed, which was not the same thing as unfeeling. Composed was a thing you built deliberately, brick by quiet brick, over 3 years of rooms that fell silent when you entered them. The very same. That was Mrs. Portia Vane, who had come up from Berkshire with her considerable beauty, her considerable ambition, and no considerable understanding of kindness. Poor Mabel's charity case. Father was a clergyman, no estate, no income, not a penny to her name. She mends the girls' ribbons and writes Mabel's calling cards, rather like a lady's maid, only one cannot properly dismiss her because of the family connection. I pity the man who marries her. The deep voice again, measured, final, the voice of someone handing down a verdict. A titter moved through the room like wind through dry grass. Clara picked up the empty vase she had set aside and walked, steadily, unhurriedly, toward the door. She did not look toward the cluster of chairs where the voice had come from. She did not trust herself to. She had reached the corridor before she allowed herself one breath, one single controlled breath, and then she continued down the hall toward the back stairs. She did not cry. She had learned long ago that crying was something you did privately, and even then, only when it was strictly necessary. She put the voice, that particular voice, away. She had no idea whose it was, and she told herself she did not wish to know. She found out, of course, by Wednesday. One did not remain long in Lady Mabel's household without developing an efficient intelligence about the social world. Clara had not cultivated it deliberately. She had simply learned to listen when people forgot she was present, which was most of the time. The voice belonged to Edmund Ashford, the Duke of Stratfton. This information was delivered to her by Bessie, Lady Mabel's parlor maid, who shared it with the comfortable relish of one passing along entirely unserious gossip about a comet or an earthquake. Something vast, remote, and thrilling from a safe distance. The Duke of Stratfton, 34 years of age, possessed of 4 estates in 3 counties, a London house in Belgrave Square that was said to be larger than some village churches, and a reputation so formidable that ambitious mothers told their daughters he was cold as Derbyshire stone and twice as immovable, and that if he ever spoke to them, they should agree with everything he said and be grateful for the attention. He had not married. The world considered this a failure on the world's part, not his. Clara considered all of this for approximately 4 minutes on Wednesday morning, then considered it no longer. The Duke of Strafton's opinion of her marital prospects was his own affair. She had a pair of Miss Forsyth's kid gloves to mend and a Latin declension to locate for Miss Jane's lesson, and neither task would complete itself. It was Thursday evening that changed everything, though Clara would not understand this until much later. Lady Mabel had accepted an invitation to the Haverstock musical, and Clara had been required to attend as escort to the younger Forsyth daughters, since Lady Mabel herself intended to spend the evening in conversation and wished the girls out from underfoot. This was the usual arrangement. Clara shepherded, supervised, kept the girls from saying anything irretrievable, and spent the musical portion of the evening standing near the far wall where the houseplants made a convenient screen. It was during the intermission, in the corridor outside the music room, that she came upon the boy. He was perhaps 8 years old, dressed in a footman's page livery, 2 sizes too large, tucked into a half-moon alcove near the cloakroom, pressing his hands to his mouth and shaking with the soundless, determined quality of a child who has been firmly told that crying at work means losing the position. His nose was bleeding, not badly but steadily, and he had no handkerchief, and someone had knocked the silver tray he'd been carrying across the corridor floor, the small cups scattered like pale flowers. Clara looked at the cups. She looked at the boy. She did not look around to see if anyone important was watching. No one important was. The corridor was empty, except for the 2 of them, and the distant sound of the Countess of Haverstock's guests laughing at something inside. She went to the boy first. She produced her own handkerchief, the good one, the one with the small embroidered A in the corner that had been her mother's, and pressed it gently to his nose, tilting his head forward the way her own father had once tilted hers after a childhood tumble. Then she crouched, ignoring entirely what the marble floor was doing to the hem of her gray skirt, and began gathering the cups. "There," she said quietly. "Tip your chin down, not back. That's right. What is your name?" "Tom, miss," the boy managed, muffled by the handkerchief. "Tom, have you anyone who will be angry with you about these?" He nodded, miserable. "Then let us get them back on the tray before anyone notices they were gone." She straightened, set the tray on a side table, and replaced the cups in their arrangement with quick, competent hands. She had arranged enough silver in enough drawing rooms to manage this in good time. "There, not a mark on them. Can you carry it? Let me see your hands." He held them out. They'd stopped shaking. "Good man," Clara said, and she meant it with her whole heart. She folded the handkerchief, stained now, no longer the good one for any practical purpose, and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "Keep it. Blow your nose properly in 5 minutes when you're around a corner." Tom looked at her with the absolute, uncomplicated trust of a child who has just been treated as though he matters. "Thank you, miss," he said, and then squared his small shoulders and carried his tray back around the corner with the careful dignity of a soldier. Clara smoothed her skirt, checked that the hem was merely dusty and not ruined, and turned back toward the music room. She came up short. The man standing 6 feet away in the corridor had clearly been there for some time. He stood very still, the particular stillness of someone who does not wish to be observed, but he was too tall and too undeniably present to be properly invisible. Dark evening coat. No expression on his face that she could readily name. Dark eyes that were not cold exactly, but careful, the way eyes are careful when they are trying to record something accurately. She knew him instantly, the breadth of the shoulders, the precision even in stillness, of someone accustomed to being the most significant person in a room. The Duke of Strafton. Something tightened in Clara's chest. Not fear precisely. Pride, perhaps, or the absence of shame. She had nothing to be ashamed of, and she was not going to arrange her face as though she did. She gave him the smallest, most precise nod possible, and walked past him into the music room. He came to Grosvenor Street on Friday. This was, by any measure, extraordinary. Dukes did not call at morning salons as a rule. They sent cards. They appeared at supper tables, to which they had been aggressively invited. They did not arrive on a gray Friday morning with no advance notice, present their card to a startled parlor maid, and request to speak with Miss Ashworth. Not Lady Mabel. Miss Ashworth. Bessie delivered this intelligence to Clara in the back sitting room, where Clara was mending Miss Jane's gloves, and the look on Bessie's face was the look of a woman who has seen a genuine marvel and wishes to be properly appreciated for bringing the news. Clara set down the gloves. She breathed once, carefully. Then she went downstairs. He was in the small front parlor. Lady Mabel had placed him there rather than the grand drawing room, as though she were not sure how seriously to take the visit, which Clara rather admired for its accidental social accuracy. He stood at the window, watching the street. He turned when she entered. "Miss Ashworth," he said, "Your Grace." She did not sit. He had not offered her the liberty, and she was not going to take it uninvited. There was a pause. He was, she observed, not a man who was made uncomfortable by silence. Most people filled silences. He inhabited them. "I have a proposition," he said at last, "not a pleasant one to make." "I have rarely been offered pleasant propositions," Clara said. "I have managed with the others." Something moved across his face. It was not quite a smile. It was the shadow of something that might become one, under better conditions. He reached into his coat and produced a small piece of folded paper, which he held out toward her. She crossed the room and took it. She unfolded it and read it. Her face remained composed, but her grip on the paper tightened by the smallest degree. It was a list of accusations. Her name, Lady Mabel's name, and a number of very specific items alleged to have gone missing from Lady Mabel's household. Small pieces of silverware, 2 cameo brooches, a quantity of lace, and a suggestion, not quite a statement, not quite a question, that the inventory had gone astray during the period of Clara's residency. "Where did you get this?" Clara's voice was quiet and entirely steady. "It was intended for Lord Forsyth," Strafton said. "It came to me by mistake. I am acquainted with Forsyth's solicitor, and the man sent it to my address in error. I read it before I understood the mistake. I came here directly." Clara refolded the paper. She thought, clearly and quickly, the way she had learned to think in 3 years of navigating a household where she had no formal standing and very little power. "You could have sent it on," she said. "Yes." "Why didn't you?" He looked at her. "Because I saw what I saw in the corridor at the Haverstocks, and I wished to hear your answer before you were given a formal accusation to defend against." She looked at him for a long moment. He had the grace not to look away. "I have taken nothing," she said. "Not a teaspoon, not a reel of thread I was not given permission to use. If you care to examine my room, you will find 3 dresses, a small traveling case, my mother's Bible, and the £50 I have managed to save from the household allowance Lady Mabel occasionally remembers to give me. That is the whole of my worldly worth, and you are welcome to inventory every thread of it." Another silence. Then, "I believe you." She had not expected that. She had expected questions or the formal polished doubt of a man conducting due process. Not that, plain, immediate, without qualification. "Then who?" she asked. "That," said the Duke of Strafton, "is the question I intend to answer, with your assistance, if you are willing." She was willing. She was willing because the alternative was waiting for the accusation to arrive formally, with Lord Forsyth's solicitor and Lady Mabel's mortification, and Clara had been waiting, passive, enduring, waiting, for 3 years. And she discovered now, standing in a small parlor, with a duke who had looked at her as though she were a person worth looking at, that she was done with waiting. Strafton's plan was this. He was already obliged to attend the Forsyth dinner the following Wednesday. Lady Mabel had been cultivating the invitation for a fortnight, and his attendance was a settled matter. He would observe. Clara would tell him everything she knew about the household's movements, the inventory, and the likely origin of the list. He had resources, a very able man of business named Garrett, who could trace the document's origins through the solicitor's office. Together they would have the truth before it became a public catastrophe. They met twice more before Wednesday, once in Lady Mabel's sitting room, ostensibly so that Clara could advise him on which flowers Lady Mabel preferred for table arrangements, a fiction so transparent that Bessie nearly vibrated with suppressed delight. And once in St. James's Park, where Clara was walking, the Forsyth children and Strafton arrived at the end of the path with the careful casualness of a man who has planned something and wishes it to look unplanned. During these meetings, something happened that neither of them had budgeted for. He asked her opinion, not about the investigation, about everything. He asked what she read. He asked about her father's parish. He asked, quietly and with apparent genuine interest, what she had intended for her life before circumstances had arranged it so differently. He listened to her answers with the focused attention of someone who is accustomed to people saying very little that is worth hearing and has found something that is and does not intend to waste it. Clara, for her part, discovered that the Duke of Strafton was not cold. He was contained, which was entirely different. He was a man who had put his warmth somewhere safe behind several layers of very effective armor because the world had given him cause to. His father had been a spendthrift and a poor judge of character. His intended, 5 years ago, had been found to have accepted his proposal largely as a strategy to access the Strafton fortune while maintaining a prior arrangement with a younger son of no fortune whatsoever. Strafton had ended it. The world had pitied him. He had disliked being pitied very much. He did not tell her any of this directly. She pieced it together from the small, precise gaps in what he said because she had spent 3 years learning to read rooms and she was extremely good at it. On Tuesday evening, Garrett delivered his findings. The list had originated with Mrs. Portia Vane. It was Mrs. Vane, beautiful, ambitious, currently the frontrunner in Lady Mabel's private calculations for a suitable match for her eldest son, Frederick Forsyth, who had noted the small domestic losses, a brooch genuinely mislaid, a piece of silverware sent to the wrong shelf, and constructed from them a deliberate narrative, delivered to Forsyth's solicitor with the suggestion that Miss Ashworth's long and unchecked access to the household warranted scrutiny. The intended effect was to remove Clara from the household before Clara could, through her proximity to Lady Mabel and her quiet competence, become an inconvenience. Garrett had, in the course of his inquiries, also discovered that Mrs. Vane's finances were considerably less secure than her manner suggested, and that she had, in 2 previous households, made use of similar tactics to remove inconvenient women from her path. Strafton read the report. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "Wednesday. Good evening, lovely people. If you are here for the first time, welcome. This story means a great deal to me, and I hope it is finding you well. If you are enjoying it so far, a like means the world and helps this channel reach more people who love these stories. Do leave a comment and tell me where in the world you are watching from. I read every single one, and I love knowing you are out there. Now, let us return to Clara and her Duke, because Wednesday is arriving, and the truth is about to come out." The Forsyth dinner was 12 persons. The table was long and candlelit, the silver was polished, and Lady Mabel presided with the anxious brightness she reserved for occasions when she was trying very hard to pretend everything was perfectly managed. Clara was not a guest. She was present in the adjacent parlor with the younger Forsyth daughters, nominally supervising their needlework, actually listening, with the composed attentiveness she had perfected over 3 years, to everything that could be heard through a door left ajar. Mrs. Vane arrived in amber silk and made, within the first quarter hour, 2 observations that were not quite addressed to Clara and not quite not addressed to her. The first was about the difficulty of maintaining proper household standards when one had uncertain connections running loose about the place. The second was a delicate reference to the particular toll it must take on a family, having to depend upon impoverished relations with no accountability to anyone. Frederick Forsyth laughed, a little uncertainly, as men often laughed at Mrs. Vane's remarks when they could not tell if they were meant as humor. Strafton, seated at Lady Mabel's right hand, a position of honor she had campaigned for with great energy, said nothing. It was during the 3rd course that Lord Forsyth mentioned, with the careful nonchalance of a man introducing an unwelcome subject, that he had received some concerning correspondence about the household accounts. Lady Mabel set down her fork. Mrs. Vane adjusted her amber bracelets. The table attended. Strafton set down his wine-glass with the particular deliberateness of someone who has chosen his moment. "I believe," he said, "that I can resolve that matter. I received the correspondence myself, by accident, last week. I have since had it investigated. The room changed. It happened the way rooms change, when a very large, very still thing begins to move. Not with noise, but with a shift in atmosphere. A sudden awareness of gravity. Lord Forsyth looked at him. Investigated by Garrett, who is thorough. The matter of the mislaid inventory has been fully traced. Stratton turned, not toward Lady Mabel, not toward Forsyth, but toward Mrs. Vane. His gaze was not unkind. It was simply precise, and it was absolutely clear that it saw everything. The items in question were located. The brooches on Lady Mabel's dressing table, catalogued under the wrong entry by the new housemaid. The silverware in the secondary pantry, where it was moved for polishing and not returned to the record. All accounted for. Nothing was taken. A pause. The initial complaint to the solicitor originated in this room, however, and was composed from incomplete information, at the very best. Mrs. Vane's amber silk seemed for a moment rather less vibrant. "I must have been mistaken," she said. Her voice was smooth. She was very accomplished. "I expect so," Stratton said, politely. Finally. Frederick Forsyth was staring at Mrs. Vane with an expression that combined dawning comprehension with something very like relief. The relief of a young man who has been admiring a beautiful, dangerous thing and has just been told, by someone who knows, that he need not buy it. Lady Mabel, who was many things but not unintelligent, looked at Mrs. Vane with a gaze that had lost several degrees of warmth. "Portia, dear," she said, with the thin, polished courtesy of an English lady delivering a verdict, "I believe you mentioned you are to visit your cousins in Bath quite soon." "Yes," said Mrs. Vane after a breath, "quite soon." It was not a dramatic ruin. It was not meant to be. It was simply the sound of every door in a room closing at once. Stratton picked up his wineglass again and said something pleasant to the gentleman on his left, and the dinner continued, and that was the end of Portia Vane's campaign. He found Clara after. The younger Forsyth daughters had been sent to bed. Clara was banking the fire in the parlor, the last task of her evening. She heard the door and turned, and there he was, without his coat, for once, just his waistcoat, and his careful dark eyes, and the beginning of something on his face that was not yet named. "It is done," he said. "I heard enough." She straightened. "Thank you." "Don't." She looked at him. "Don't thank me," he said. "It implies I did you a kindness. I did you a justice. There is a difference." Something moved in her chest, a shifting, a loosening, like a rope held too long finally let down. She had been thanking people for basic justice for 3 years. No one had ever pointed out the difference before. "You said something," she told him, "that first morning at the salon, about the man who married me." He was quiet for a moment. The fire popped. Rain had begun against the window. "I did," he said. "I had arrived 10 minutes earlier than I intended, and I found myself in a room full of people discussing someone they had evidently decided required discussing. I was forming an opinion of them, not of you." A pause. "And then I saw you leave the room." "I was not aware you saw me leave." "You walked," he said, as though none of it mattered. "Not because you were above it, because you had decided not to carry it." He looked at her. "I have been trying to learn that trick for 20 years. Clara looked at the fire. She thought about her mother's handkerchief, given to a frightened boy in a corridor, gone now, irretrievable and right to be gone. She thought about 3 years of being invisible, and how being truly seen, by these particular dark, careful eyes, felt less like rescue and more like recognition. "I have a question," he said. His voice had changed, still precise, but the armor, she noticed, was off. She could not see where he had put it. She suspected he had put it down on purpose. She waited. "Would you—" He stopped. He began again with the particular effortful directness of a man who does not often say unplanned things. "I have said the wrong thing about you, publicly, in a room full of people. I have conducted an investigation in your name without asking your leave until after I had begun. I have been—" He paused. Present in your vicinity with a frequency that is perhaps not entirely explained by a shared interest in household inventory. Perhaps not, Clara said carefully. There was warmth somewhere in her throat. I find that I cannot improve on your company, he said. I have tried. I am generally very good at improving on things. You are, she agreed. This is the part, he said, where I had intended to say something composed and sufficient. And I find I cannot, because you look at me, he said, the way you looked at me in that corridor, as though you see exactly who I am and have assessed it clearly and have not yet decided to run. And it is the most. He stopped himself again. His jaw was set. He was not a man who lost his words. It was costing him something to lose them now, and he was not hiding that it was. I would like to ask you to marry me, he said. I pity the man who marries you. I said that. I was wrong. I was profoundly, completely, irrevocably wrong. The man who marries you has no need of pity whatsoever. Clara looked at him. The fire threw gold across the room. The rain pressed at the window. Somewhere above them, the house ticked and settled into its quiet, and she stood at the center of a moment that she would remember, clearly and without embellishment, for the rest of her life. You are asking me, she said, while you are still embarrassed about having said it. Yes, that is either very honest or very reckless. Both, probably. His mouth did the thing that was not quite a smile. Is there an answer? There is, Clara said. The warmth had risen from her throat to her cheeks. She thought about the things she had done when no one important was watching. The cups gathered from a corridor floor, the handkerchief given away, the dignity maintained when it was the only thing she had left to maintain. And she thought about this man, this careful, guarded, formidable man who had watched and understood and had not looked away. Yes, she said, plainly, without decoration. Yes, he breathed, just once, quickly, as though he had not been entirely certain of the answer and had been holding that uncertainty very correctly behind his ribs. Then he crossed the room and took her hand and held it with the careful, absolute steadiness of someone who has no intention of letting go, and they stood by the fire while the rain came down outside, and neither of them said anything more, because nothing more was needed. The engagement was announced the following week. The reaction in London was memorable. Lady Mabel was so astonished that she sat down abruptly on the nearest chair and had to be given sal volatile. Bessie received the news with the composed satisfaction of a woman who has been expecting it and wishes full credit for having done so. The Forsyth daughters were unreservedly delighted, which was the reaction Clara minded about most. Mrs. Portia Vane had, by then, departed for Bath and was not available for comment. They were married in March at St. George's, Hanover Square, in the manner of such things. Not quietly, because a Duke of Strafton could not marry quietly, but with a simplicity that Clara had insisted upon and that Strafton had agreed to without argument, which surprised his solicitor somewhat. Clara wore ivory silk, which was not the height of fashion, but suited her coloring well, and in her hair she wore, pinned with a small pearl, a sprig of white hawthorn from the Strafton Conservatory, which the head gardener had declared slightly unusual for March, and which Strafton had procured anyway because she had once mentioned, in passing, that it smelled like the Derbyshire lanes near her father's church, and he had noted it and filed it carefully away. That was the thing about him. He noted. He filed. He produced the small exact thing at the small exact moment, and never expected to be thanked for it. Clara thanked him anyway, always, because she believed in naming good things when they occurred. The one heirloom she carried into the marriage was her mother's Bible, still in her small traveling case, its spine worn to softness, its pages marked at Corinthians. Charity suffereth long and is kind. She kept it on the table in her sitting room at Strafton House, where she could see it from her writing desk, 1 year later. It was a Tuesday in March, which is a different thing entirely from a Tuesday in November. This one had come in mild and rain-washed, the city's smoke cut through by the suggestion of real air, the light early and unexpectedly golden. Clara was in the library, her favorite room in the house, and a very serious library it was, 2 stories of shelving with a ladder on a brass rail and a deep window seat that faced south. She had a book open in her lap and had stopped reading it some time ago without noticing, because the view from the window was extremely good, and she was, if she was honest, also listening for footsteps. She had become, this past year, a woman who listened for footsteps. Specifically, one set, decisive, unhurried, the footsteps of a man who does not wonder which room you are in, because he already knows. The library door opened. Strafton came in, shrugged off his coat without looking for somewhere to put it, a habit that still charmed her unreasonably, and dropped into the chair across the window seat with the looseness of a man entirely at home. His cravat was already undone. He had been in meetings since 7 that morning. His cravat was always the first casualty by 2 in the afternoon. "You didn't finish your book," he observed, looking at the page number and then at her. "I was distracted." "By the view?" "By thinking," Clara said. "I had a letter this morning, from Bessie." "Oh?" "She is to be married, the under-butler at the Haverstock house. She is very happy." Clara smiled. It was a genuine, unguarded smile, the kind she had learned to stop suppressing. "She says—" She paused because there was a small, careful warmth building somewhere under her ribs, and she wanted to choose the right words. "She says she always knew how it would turn out, and she would like me to know that she considers herself substantially responsible." Strafton looked at her. The careful dark eyes, which were not cold, had never been cold, which she now understood entirely. "She is not entirely wrong," he said. "No," Clara admitted. He reached across the space between them, as he often did, and took her hand. The same steadiness, the same absolute lack of performance in it. Just the fact of it, her hand, his hand, the uncomplicated daily truth of being claimed and seen. On the low table beside her, her mother's Bible sat open where she had been reading it this morning. The bookmark, a small piece of folded paper that had been with the book as long as she could remember, had slipped slightly, and she reached to tuck it straight and paused. She had found the handkerchief last month. Not her handkerchief. That was long gone, given to a small boy in a corridor and correctly not returned. But Strafton had, at some point in the autumn, quietly located the boy, Tom, who was still a page at the Haverstock house, and had ensured, through the kind of discreet arrangement at which he excelled, that Tom had been moved into a better position in a house where the housekeeper was known to be both fair and generous. He had not mentioned this to Clara. She had found it out from Garrett, who had been asked to facilitate the arrangement, and who mentioned it to Clara's maid, who told Clara. She had asked Strafton about it that evening. "His hands," he'd said simply. "They'd stopped shaking. You did that." She had not had the words for it at the time. She still was not sure she did. She only knew that it was the truest thing she had ever been given, to be known that thoroughly, that quietly, that without requirement of performance. Clara looked at her husband now, in the library's golden afternoon light, his undone cravat, and his safe, dark eyes, and his large, capable hands holding hers, and she thought of what he had said in that small parlor a year ago. "I pity the man who marries you," and the complete, absolute, settled reversal of it that was this room, this moment, this ordinary Tuesday in March. "You are smiling," he observed. "I was thinking," she said, "about pity." He tilted his head. "I don't think," Clara said, with perfect composure, "that you require it." Something broke open in his face, properly, fully, without armor. The smile arrived, at last, entirely. "No," said Edmund Ashford, Duke of Strafton, the most feared and the most seen and the most quietly happy man in London. "I don't believe I do." Outside, the March light held a little longer than it should, gold on the books and the brass rail, and the worn cover of an old Bible, and the hands of 2 people who had found, in each other, the particular grace of being truly looked at, and not found wanting. Dear friends, thank you so much for spending this time with Clara and her Duke. If this story reached your heart a little, please do leave it a like. It truly helps this channel more than you know. I would love to know where you are watching from tonight. Leave a comment below, because every single one makes my day. The quiet thought I carry away from Clara's story is this: your worth is not determined by the room that fails to see you. Be kind when no one important is watching. Be dignified when it costs you something. Be patient with guarded people. Sometimes they are only waiting for someone safe to put the armor down for. Subscribe if you would like more stories like this one, and I will see you in the next. Good night.